Today I'm going to be doing another real-time paint-along video, so I'm going to share my entire process from start to finish. You are welcome to paint along with me if you want. This is the reference picture I'm going to be using. I'll also put a link below in the description if you want to grab it from my blog. I'll put the full resolution version there. For this painting, I prepared my pencil sketch ahead of time. I thought it would be nice to be able to get right into the painting, so that's what we're going to do. If you're painting along, feel free to pause here and, take time on your sketch. Mine is pretty rough. I just wanted to get the basic shapes that are going to be in the composition. I didn't figure out every single tree branch or anything, so hopefully that doesn't backfire later, but let's see what happens. So I want to start with the lighter values in this scene, so that will be the light greens, maybe the light blue in the sky, and the lighter color bark on the tree. So I'm going to begin with the bark, I think. That's just going by my gut feel, I guess. Usually I try to work big to small shapes. Technically, I think the biggest shape is probably the green. I'm just gonna go with what I feel like doing first. So I'm mixing up a warm beigey brown color with some yellow, Acacia brown, and white. I'm looking at the reference picture and I'm just gonna look at on the branches, where I see highlights and things. I'm gonna add some more water to the mixture. And I want this to be pretty transparent and luminous. So here we go. So as I mentioned, my sketch is somewhat basic in the sense that I didn't, sort out every branch and, each one, there's quite a few overlapping ones. It's kind of complicated shape, this tree, and I think it's really beautiful, but there's indeed a lot going on. So I'm gonna try to figure that out more now in the painting phase. When I paint trees, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, while the paint is still wet, I like to kind of go in and paint the light and the shadow side and kind of let them touch each other a little bit like this, so you get a soft blend between them. So I'm gonna grab some cool colors here too. Oh, that was not mixed very well. I'm gonna mix that a little bit more. I'm just trying to mix up a dark shadow that has a lot of blue to it, so I'm grabbing these blues, maybe a little bit of purple. It's a little bit muddy maybe, but that's okay. We'll keep going. I think the good thing about working with gouache is this is just layer one, and we can always paint over this. So it doesn't need to be perfect. It's just the first wash. And whatever we do here that we like, if anything is just perfect and lovely, then we'll leave it and make sure that we keep, show through to that. But for anything that isn't quite right, we'll just adjust it a little bit on the next pass. So that's one thing that I find really relaxing and nice about working with gouache. I also like to exaggerate the colors a lot, so that's a personal preference. As far as the cools and warms and things like that, I really like the cool blue in the shadows, and I really like the warm light. And I think that's pretty normal. I think, it seems like saturated colors are very, very popular. But one thing that I'm trying to pay attention to is the fact that it is good to leave some areas less saturated, because then those areas that you want to really pop, that's when you can put the most saturation in, and it'll really draw the attention there and have a more dramatic effect than if everything is very saturated. So I'm trying to have some more self-control and not put the bright colors absolutely everywhere, but it's hard. I'm still kind of exploring and trying to find a balance with that and figure out what I like. But overall, I think I still tend toward more saturated colors, and usually, like, from the reference picture to my painting, things usually end up a bit brighter than they were originally. So this tree is pretty complicated, but what I'm trying to do to keep it simple for myself is I'm just going to like the branch groups and painting the light and the dark of each one. And, you know, can't do it all at once, but we'll bring it together by the end. So there's another branch that's behind here. I need to add in. And there's some beautiful wildflowers coming up in front of this tree, so I need to make sure, I'm not sure if it'll happen in this layer or not, but I need to make sure it gets pretty dark down here eventually, so that, because we're going to be painting the flowers on top of that, and we really want them to shine. We really want them to have a high contrast and really pop. So we need to make sure that the background for them, which is this shadow area of the tree, is dark enough. I'll probably do one more layer of shadow before we're able to paint on top of it. I really like this one branch that comes out over here. I think in my sketch I didn't move it out quite far enough. I could try to push it a little further to the left now, because it does feel like it reaches out a little bit further than the others. I also like to add some green sometimes into the shadows. In a scene like this, there's a lot of green light bouncing around, either from the grass or because light's shining through the green leaves of the tree. So there's a lot of green bounce light. Plus the tree can have like moss and things like that on it. So I do see hints of green here and there. There's a branch here that kind of comes up and crosses over. I see some green in that one, I think. Just a little bit. Looking at the reference picture, if you see something that you like, you can exaggerate it or use your imagination and add something that's not even there that you think might be nice. Get a little darker shadow at the bottom of this. If your tree looks a little crazy at this point, don't worry. I feel like mine looks a little crazy too. It's just layer one, remember. We're going to be able to paint over everything and fix little things here and there. This is just a nice base for us to work on. That's kind of a thing that's helped me with painting over the last couple years, I guess, is thinking about it like the process is sort of troubleshooting almost the whole time. You know, you start out with the base layer, you try your best to get things as close to right from the beginning as you can, but you know, we're not perfect. So then, you know, you just get things started, and then as you go, you can tweak it here and there and fix things, and that's just how it goes. So no need to be worried if it doesn't look perfect from the start. I think this one on the left needs a little bit more shadow, and then I want to move to the grass, I think. So even though the tree needs a lot more done to it, I think we're reaching the end of layer one, and we'll have to save the next steps for layer two. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to the grass, and I'm going to start off with this leaf green. I think this is already a good color to start with here. Maybe some of this warm colors mixing in, that's fine. And so I'm just looking at the reference picture and seeing where there are, you know, these large bright areas. I'm going to start with that. I really like the striping effect from the dappled lighting, the transition between the shadows and highlights. I also have the spring green, which is also a bright green, but it's a little darker than the leaf green. So let's get some of that in as a transition. So because I like the colors to blend together while the paint is wet, I kind of move quickly in this stage, so it can be a little bit hard to have like very, very precise control when you're going fast. But I think it's okay because these are just little grassy areas. It doesn't have to be too perfect. And if you want a little bit more time to work with, you could wet the paper first a little bit, and then it'll stay wet a little bit longer for you to go through this process. So I'm also using now the dark green, and I think the dark green is very saturated. I think I might want it to be a little bit more muted, so I'm gonna add some brown to it, and maybe even this purple. And then I'm looking at the photo, and there's a really dark area here. Let's go a little bit more purple, where it comes up against the tree, the shadow, and we've got this cool shape, something like this. It's even more of a V right here. And over on this side, we don't have much. I'm gonna add a little shadow down there, but mostly the lighting is coming from that side. A little bit of a shadow here. And go back to the spring green and then kind of connect those fully so we get the soft edge. And we'll see through here to some lighter green. And up in the trees, there's also a lot of light green, so I'm kind of feeling like maybe I should get up there with some of this. Mostly on the left side. And I'm gonna put some of these lighter areas. I want to kind of have them creep in behind the tree here. In the photo, they're mostly to the left, but I think it would look nice. Yeah, so just bringing some of these lighter colors in here. And there's a little bit back here too. And then I'm going to shift to the spring green, but I'm going to add some blue. So I want this spring green to be a little bit more blue and maybe lighter. Maybe I'll add some white to kind of mute it a little bit. So the white's going to desaturate a little bit, along with making it a little bit lighter. Because I don't want this to compete too much with the greens down here. I want the greens down here to be the brightest. They're actually maybe a little bit too bright. We'll get to that. You can maybe mute them a little bit in the next layer. And then we're gonna get a little bit darker. And then back here, there's a really dark, that's like the darkest place that I see in the whole scene. In my photo, generally for stuff in the background, I like to kind of wash it out a little bit. You know, this is the focal point, so I want this to have the most contrast. So making this area as dark as it is in the reference picture might not benefit our painting. So let's see what to do. I'm not sure exactly yet. I think I'm just gonna mix up a color similar to what I had here, but with a light blue involved. So it still feels dark, but maybe not as dark. Oh, it's still quite dark. Let's see. Maybe a little bit of white. It always starts to feel better the less white there is on the paper. It really helps to visualize the values in the scene once we get rid of that. Because it really throws things off when you have such a bright area up here, because it's not how it's going to be. I think I got a little too dark right here, but that's okay. We will add light back in. So for the sky, I'm going to use the aqua blue and maybe a little bit of ultramarine added in just to... do I like that actually? Not sure. Let's just try it. So it's a bit maybe on the darker value, so I can either, you know, make it more transparent. We can also add white. There's only a little bit of blue peeking through. So I'm gonna paint it in for this first layer, but in future layers, a lot of this is gonna be covered. I like a little bit of a gradient, so I'm going more transparent wherever the sky is lower like this, towards the horizon line. And then a little bit darker up here. Meet each other and have a bit of a gradient. But yeah, this is just layer one. So there's going to be branches and leaves coming up in front of this sky. We can also add blue back in. So later on, after this is dry, we can mix up a more opaque blue and we can paint blue back in over here and cover up some areas and have the sky show through a little bit more. Okay, so we have our background. That was step one. Now it's time to take a breath, have some tea. I know that was probably pretty fast. I always feel like the first layer is like that for me, mainly because I am going for a lot of wet effects. So you can see like these areas, how they blend together. I really like these effects. I think they're nice and organic and soft, but you kind of have to paint one color and then another color quickly to get them together fast enough while they're still wet that you get these blends. So the background layer always feels kind of like a crazy rush. Next layer is mostly going to be foliage, like greenery, leaves and grasses. just putting the next layer of detail. So that's going to be some shadows in the light areas and maybe some lighter details in the shadow areas. Also, we have a couple branches that are not even painted in at all, and I think we can bring those guys in back here. I do think it helps to have all the branches in as soon as possible, because when we start to paint the foliage coming off of the tree, then we know where to focus, like the groupings of leaves and stuff like that. Okay, let's go with step 2. For the next step, I have a couple brushes in mind that I think I'm gonna go with. They are calligraphy style brushes. I can link you to this one. This one here, I got it a long time ago and I'm not sure exactly where I got it, but I think if you search online for calligraphy brushes, you're gonna find this sort of thing, I hope. But again, I'll link you to this one. I like these for painting grassy and leafy textures. And let me show you an example. If you look over at my palette for a moment, this kind of brush, it will grip together and you can do these nice pointed strokes. But if you sort of push down on the palette and spread the bristles out like this, you can get this effect where the bristles will be split and you can kind of paint and get this sort of look, which I like for grasses. So I'm just gonna start like this. And I've kind of mixed up a similar color to what's in the shadows here. So then I can kind of come up from that and sort of make it look like some of the grasses are breaking out of that group, and just gives it a more natural edge, but without losing that shape completely, because we like, you know, the big strong shapes. We want to keep that, but just add some grassy texture to the edges. It's interesting how your brain will fill things in. Like, it just sort of accepts that this all has that sort of texture of the grass, even though we're not painting it everywhere. We're just painting couple little bits here and there. And we can maybe have a couple come higher up. Variety is good when painting nature. So I'm gonna mix a little bit of that blue, aqua blue, because back here we had used that. I want to keep it a little bit faded compared to this, just a little bit lighter. It's not by much. It's really not by much, but maybe it makes a difference. You can also do this with just a regular round brush too, of course. I just find this a little faster because we have 3 points instead of 1. So you can definitely do this with a round brush if that's what you have, don't worry. You just have to make a few more brush strokes. I want to move on to the next color. So something in between here. Let's just mix that. So I'm looking for a green that's gonna match a little bit more this color. That looks okay. All right, so it's a little darker, but that's okay. I like how that's turning out. I really like how soft the grass is in the photo. And, you know, when I was there in person, it looked so soft and nice. One thing that I'm always trying to pay attention to is spacing these out in a way that feels natural. So basically, I have this instinct to kind of go on autopilot sometimes, and you know, it's very relaxing to make these little brush strokes and just kind of fill in the grass. And before you know it, you can fill in everything. You know, this whole place will be full of brush strokes. But it's kind of important to leave some areas of rest. Your brain is filling in some of these spaces. You don't need to actually put individual brush strokes everywhere to indicate each blade of grass. We want to give the impression of it, and that'll make it look softer and more organic. Now, if you're going for like a hyper realism, of course that's different, and then you're gonna be getting into that level of detail. But for the style of painting that I like to do, it's more giving the feeling and the impression of a place rather than an exact representation. And I like how it looks better when you kind of leave some little areas. We want some areas where there's more detail and some areas where there's less. And you want to think about where the detail is going to be. We are going to eventually focus the detail here. Okay, so we've worked down here for a while. I think maybe we should move up a bit. We need to get some of these branches in. So these are darker, they're pushed back, they're in the shadows. So I'm gonna go with darker, sort of like a muddy brown green color, maybe. Let's see. So those two branches have a little bit more of a blue-green hue to them, but some of the others are more brown from what I can see. Following the reference, so let's work on these. I really like the shape of this one, so hopefully I can get it right. So it comes out here, and then kind of changes direction behind there and curves down. It's a little bit squished because my proportions aren't quite right in the tree, but that's okay. Nobody's gonna know. Only you guys, because you see the reference picture. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna go to the rest of the little branches and just add those in. My mindset for this is just to get the impression of the tree. I don't necessarily care about getting every branch in the exact place that it is in the photo. I'll say, okay, what stands out to me? What's really interesting here? Accidentally painted over a little too much there, but we can just fix that later. But anyway, I like to think about which branches look really nice, which have an interesting shape, and which ones that I think really give the personality to the tree, because this tree has a recognizable shape to it. So I do want to achieve that, but I don't mind, you know, if there's some little changes here or there. So like this branch I really like. I like that curve. So I thought that one was important to have in. And there's going to be a lighter one that comes off of this and overlaps this branch here. So I kind of choose which ones I think are important enough to pay close attention to. And then some other ones are, I don't feel like they add or take away. So it's kind of less important to get those exactly as they are. So this branch here attaches to this one. What I want to do is bring a little bit more of a shadow here onto this branch. And then as it goes lower and lower, the shadow kind of comes across here. That's what I'm seeing in the photo. You can see my mixing is pretty messy, but I like to let the colors mix together a little bit, get a little taste of each other in them. That feel like it helps me get a little bit more of a natural look to my color mixing in the end. Everyone's different, so I like to explain and share what I'm doing, but for someone else, you may or may not like that method. But that's why my palette looks the way it does. So here, there's a little bit of a tree bark texture that we see right at that transition of the shadows and the highlights. So I'm gonna try to kind of put some lines or like scribble in a bit to give that sort of bark texture there. So with this second layer on the tree, we're trying to pay attention to values as well. So looking at the reference picture, places like this, in the photo, the background foliage is lighter than the tree. So right now we're getting that. Down here, I guess we're either gonna need to make the tree a little darker, the background a little lighter, or just be okay with the fact that there's becomes a little bit of a lost edge there. So we'll have to explore that and see what looks best. But I am looking at the reference and then looking at my tree and saying, like, does it make sense? Is the right thing lighter than the than the other thing? Like here, this is lighter than this. Okay, that's how it should be. So I'm just doing those kind of checks as I paint because those sorts of things are really important. Values makes a big difference in how things read. And sometimes it's very easy to just keep painting and not notice that there's a mistake there. So I try to check those things and remind myself to check those things. So here I painted an area of sky. Realistically, looking at the photo, there should be still another part of the tree actually. So I think I'm going to fill that in. I think balance wise and mass wise for the tree, it makes, yeah, it feels better for that to be a big chunky branch. With this branch, we're having the same thing as the one down here, where it kind of fades down into the shadows. In this case, there's some dappled light, so we can kind of put some shapes like this to look like shadow of the tree leaves. And I'm keeping them like a somewhat transparent bluish gray color. Could even bring a little bit more green into that mix, I think. Oh, that's too much. Like, I don't want it to be green, but just a little hint of green. So I'm trying to keep this soft. So what I'm doing is grabbing my color, painting in some leaf shapes like this, and then kind of rinsing off my brush, like half rinsing it off, not completely cleaning it, but just kind of dipping it in the water, swishing it a little bit, and then it's a little too much water, and then bringing that in. So you can see the next brush strokes that I'm doing here are quite transparent, touching some of those original ones and letting the color like bleed out. So it kind of has some area that's a little bit more transparent, some area that's less transparent. So down here, we've got something like that too. So what I'm doing is kind of adding the color like this. And then rinsing my brush a bit. And then adding some more wet areas next to there and letting it like blur out. The shadows here, if you look at the reference, they're quite blurry. So we've got different colors in the shadows, mainly purples, blues, greens, and then some brown, which is, you know, brown is the color that we think of when we think of tree bark. But we've got all these other colors in the mix too. At the bottom here, I'm going to add a little bit more green into my mixture because I want a subtle transition between the green grass and the bark. So I kind of want the browns and greens to all blend together. I think it's nice to have a variety of like thicknesses and sizes for the branches. So right now we've got some big ones, we've got a couple medium, and we are just getting started with small branches. So I think we need a few more smaller sized branches up here. And right now I'm focusing on the darker colored branches because they're going to be more pushed back in the shadows. They're going to be further away. And I think in the next layer, we're going to paint some of the lighter branches, and we're going to use a more opaque mixture of paint. So it'll be easier to paint over top of these guys that we've already done. So as you can see in this layer, I've done a lot of transparent painting on top of the layer below, and I've gotten questions about this. How do you layer without lifting up the paint below? And that's something that I can talk about in more detail. Maybe I could even make a video about that, about layering. But mainly, as you can see, I'm trying to paint pretty quickly. Like I'm looking where I want to paint and then I'm just going for it, and maybe making a couple little paint strokes, and then I'm leaving that area alone. So if you paint pretty decisively when you layer, it's not so much of a problem. If I were to go back and forth over one area a lot, that's when it'll start to reactivate the paint from lower layers. Also, when you're painting over a layer that's pretty transparent, it's less likely to lift up. If I'm painting over an area where I used like really, really thick paint, it's more likely that paint below can get involved. So there's a couple different variables, but most of the time, I think the key thing is just when you're layering, you can't go back and forth over one area too many times. So if you don't like something, if you're trying to layer and something doesn't work out, just don't panic, leave it, let it dry, and then try again. But if you go back and forth too much over that one area, then things are going to lift up. So in this layer, in some areas, I'm kind of toning down my original colors. Like here, I went with a very dark purple in the shadows, and I'm adding some brown to kind of tone that down into like a little bit more of a natural color. I like to push those colors. Like I was saying, I like saturated color. I like to make it more dramatic when I can. But that's also what's nice about layer 2 is kind of looking and seeing where does it work, where does it not work, where is it catching our eye too much, and then we can tone that down. And that's sort of the the troubleshooting portion that I was talking about. We're in that now. So far, we've added more detail down here. We've added more detail to the tree. The last thing we need to do as part of like layer 2 will be the background here. So we're gonna do that, and then we'll dry everything and think about our next steps, and then move into layer 3. So this brush is a little bit larger, similar to the one that I was using for the grasses down here. Might need to put some more paint on my palette, but let's start with the green and maybe the dark greens. This is spring green and the dark green, and maybe a little white. I'm painting the distant foliage back there, maybe the light blue actually. And let's see how this looks. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit more water to that. Okay, so I'm just kind of dabbing down with the brush to make these little groupings of leaves. We're not really painting individual leaves, but we're just sort of painting, you know, if you look at the photo, you see like sort of foliage bunched up and shadows and highlights, and just a general organic kind of shapes back here. And I want to bring some in front of the shadows here. Just coming down towards us. Same thing over here. So on this side, there's a couple places where if we add some shadow back behind the tree, it's gonna help the tree to pop out even more because this side of the tree is light on the bark. This can also be done with the round brush. And I probably will switch to the round brush for a couple details that I want some extra precise control on. So I'm gonna add a couple little bits of this shape down here too. Earlier, I was saying that I was a little afraid to go dark back here. Looking at it now, I kind of feel like something's missing. I feel like I do want to add a little shadow right here, but I'm gonna be careful. I don't want to go too far with it. They're gonna do some purple and brown, a little blue. And let's just get a tiny bit in here. We'll see what it looks like when it dries. Hopefully this was a good choice, but I felt like there was a little something missing. And while I have this color on my brush, I'm just gonna come to the edge of the tree and add one more little layer of shadow there. I want to add some of the green tree leaves that come behind the tree, darker ones in shadow, and then we're going to add some lighter leaves that are in front of the tree. I want something opaque. I do want these leaves to feel more solid, so I'm going to make sure my mixture is a little bit more opaque. So I'm going to use this dark green and I think some Tasha brown because I want to warm it up a little bit, and let's see about adding some white. I'm just going to try up here and see how this looks. Okay, I like it, except I do think it's still too saturated. I'm gonna try mixing some brown in there. I kind of want it to sort of blend in with the branches there and be like a similar color to them. I'm gonna try to do what I did earlier and split some of these. I think these leaves are really gonna bring things together. This adds a lot of weight to the upper right part of the canvas. I'm trying to spread out these leaves in a way that there's different groupings and then there's space in between the groupings. I don't want to fill it in exactly the same everywhere. I don't want evenly spaced leaves everywhere. Just because if you look at the photo, there's some areas with larger amounts of sky poking through and then smaller, and then, you know, there's places with the leaves clumped up more together and it just feels more natural. Even if they were evenly spaced, because occasionally you get those situations and you're looking at the photo and you're like, huh, that's funny that they're all even like that, but it's still, I feel like it looks more natural when they're not. So sometimes I'll, you know, paint a scene with trees and the tree trunks are all perfectly evenly spaced. It's like, huh, what are the chances? But let's move one over. Let's move one over a little bit and kind of get a little bit of a variety there. Sometimes nature can do that where it puts things perfectly spaced, but it tends to look better if we don't paint it that way. So if you want to learn some more techniques for painting leaves, I have a video on that I recently made, and I'm using some of those techniques here with these kind of quick jabbing motions. I'm using that kind of technique to paint these, and I'll link that video because it goes into it a little bit slower and in more detail, and goes over a bunch of different types of leaves. And these are just things that I use often in my paintings. So I might help to give that a look if you like. When I'm painting leaves, I like to think about the branches that they might be coming off from. So some of these I have a specific branch that they're associated with, but some of them I don't, because we didn't get that far yet. We didn't draw those branches. So I am just trying to think about like kind of arching them this way and how gravity might affect them, or things like that, how they might be angled to make it more interesting, rather than having them all be the same direction, same shape, that kind of thing. I think I also talk about that in the video, but just thinking about that as you paint. It's very easy to go on autopilot when painting such relaxing things like this, and especially when you're doing repeated shapes like we are here, and just do. Before I know it, I filled up a whole area, but you know, if we really pay attention closely as we're painting, we can make it a lot more interesting. So thinking about those little details. I also want some of these leaves to come in front of the branches and trunks because, well, that's only natural too, of course. I don't want to avoid all of them. I do want some of the leaves to be clear that they're going behind, but we also need some in front. So this area looks like this is dried, and it came out a little darker than I was expecting. I'm going to take the color that I'm using at the moment and just kind of paint over some of the edges. Not the full shape, but just paint some of the edges so it makes a more soft transition into that darker color. I like painting these little shapes down here because I sort of see it as like gaps in between some of the lighter groupings of grasses and plants and stuff. Just seeing into little pockets of shadow and things like that. So I do want to have a lot more of these leaves before the end, but I think we might be getting in a good place to call it the end of this second layer anyway. And then see about adding some lighter leaves, and then see about the total balance of everything. I think we might need some more mass right in this area. So actually right now I'm going to go ahead and fix that. But I think we're at a place where we might need to stop, take a look, take a couple moments to think about what the next step is. So the painting is dry. I took a couple minutes away from the painting and coming back with some fresh eyes. So not a long break, but even a little one can help. So I'm looking at the reference picture, looking at my painting. I think the area that most jumps out at me is right here. This area is just like it's too much of a big mass area. So I want to cut into this a little bit. We're going to bring some leaves down in front. Maybe I'll actually make this a little bit thinner by just, using a color green like this and painting over it and kind of just making it the shape a little smaller. We're going to start working on bringing lighter grasses and leaves up in front and up in front of here. So in the photo, the grasses and the plants here come up like quite a bit higher than what I've done. Part of that was intentional because I knew I was going to layer above. But I have to say, actually, I probably could have moved the tree up a little higher. So we'll just go up with the plants. We'll bring the plants a little higher and it is going to all work out. The main things are fixing one thing and then continuing on with detail and just moving along with the painting. So I think what I want to do first is fix the part that's bothering me. And looking at the photo, I think I'm just gonna trim it a little bit. I'm just gonna bring it in. So already it's a little bit less bulky. The next thing I want to look at is adding a highlight here. I'm gonna take white, bring it over here, some of this Tasha brown, and a bit of yellow. Maybe that's too light. Maybe I want something a little bit more like that. I am gonna go for it. I'm gonna start right at the edge here. So I can actually purposely bring up some of that color below if we want to try to blend it in a little bit. So I'm cleaning my brush off, letting my brush be a little bit wet, and then just kind of scrubbing back and forth a little bit here. I hope you can see this. Sometimes the wet paint reflects, so the camera has trouble, but hopefully one of the camera angles will give you a good look at this. But I think that works for me. I think that looks better. Let's add some more highlights here and there. So there's a couple places up here where we get a little streaks of light because light's shining through the leaves and we've got, you know, this dappled light, some little areas. Bring some more white into that. This branch here, the color that I originally used was not saturated enough. I think it's like a little dull compared to the highlights over here. So I'm going to paint over that a little bit. Oops. We will paint over that. So I hope you can see how many times I either kind of mess up something or just don't pick the right color from the start and then on the next layer kind of solve that. And this is very common for my painting process. So it's no need to stress if something doesn't go well the first time. So here on the right side, one thing that I also want to fix is this this line here got quite like bumpy and soft and ripply. Like it's if you look at the photo, it should be like a nice strong firm shape to the side of the tree. So I'm gonna try to fix that up with my round brush here. Kind of a shame to lose some of those nice soft transitions, but I think there it's more important to have the edge be nice and strong. All right, let's see if I can pull that up a bit. I like when the paint gets a little bit dry when I'm painting trees like this. So you can kind of do a dry brushing thing where you drag the brush a little bit. It's not extremely dry right now, but you do get some of those effects at the edges. All right, I'm gonna switch to a smaller round brush, and I think I am gonna add in some extra branches. We're gonna see through to a little bit of sky right here. So part of why I wanted to add that bit is that there's a spot here with a highlight that I really like, and there wasn't quite room for it. So we gotta wait for things to dry a little bit more, and then we'll be able to add that. In the meantime, I'm gonna add some more highlights over here. Trying to drag the brush a little bit. I feel like the light was the color that I chose for the light over here maybe could have been a little bit lighter value. I do like the hue. I think that the color is nice, but value-wise, I feel like it needs to be a little lighter, so it's part of what I'm doing right now. If I had gotten the color right the first time, then I probably wouldn't be adding this dry brushing, because I kind of liked how it looked with just those shadows on there. I thought that was kind of nice, but because I needed to lighten things, I'm forced to come back in here with these highlights. I think no matter what, painting in some highlights would have been part of the process. I always come in at the end with highlights in the most, most important bright areas. But yeah, I think that might have been cleaner if I had gotten the color right in the first pass. Okay, that's still drying, so I'm gonna wait. And then over here, we can put some lights. But each one of these paintings is a study, and it's, it's for fun, but also for learning. So I like to think about what I'm doing and like what I liked and what I didn't like, or what worked out, what didn't, or okay, maybe I can remember to do this differently next time. Because for me, that's definitely what I'm trying to get out of these. Trying to enjoy myself with the painting and learn a little bit. Okay, I think this area is dry because I want to add a highlight. So I'm going to start here and kind of work my way up there. I'm starting to like the lighting. I think these adjustments are helping. Starting to feel better and more sunny. Really like this highlight down here. A little dry brushing. Especially in the texture right where the highlight and shadow meet. The little dry brushing texture is nice here because I think it helps look gritty, like the texture of the wood, the bark. With dry brushing, you have to really make sure that you don't add too much water to the paint. Otherwise, it's not really possible. Let's do some here. Maybe a little darker as we go down. Ooh, let's put some right there too. Okay, so this trunk, as it comes further down, it does have an area on the right side that's getting hit with light. So I have to figure out where I want that to be. It's gonna be pretty bold. I don't know why I made it so high. That was not really the right place. What's the best way to do this? Okay, so I don't like the placement of that. Let me try. I'm just gonna wet this. See if we can lift it up. This is gonna get a bit messy, but I can show you how to fix something like this or change it. If I made something, a little mistake like that up here, I probably wouldn't bother. I'd be like, okay, whatever, the highlight or the shadow is moved over a little bit, it doesn't matter. But in this case, I think it does, because this is the focal point, and that's sort of a leading line towards the focal point. And I really want to like the placement. I really want the placement to be perfect. So I mixed up that shadow color again. We lifted up the highlight I didn't like. I'm just gonna paint over it, darken it again, and then after it dries, we should be basically where we were before. It's just really important to wait for things to dry in this case. So I think I will actually just quickly use the hairdryer here. That way we don't have to wait, and I know that it's properly dry. Okay, so it's close to completely dry, but I'm noticing even at this stage that it's drying a bit darker. So my mix was a bit darker than what was there before, but I kind of like it. So that's a happy accident for you. Okay, so I'm gonna take that color and bring it in a couple more places. Up here. It's just gonna be a bit more bold, a bit more contrast. Where else? I'm gonna try making also some organic shapes with these shadows, like adding some little like blotches here and there, maybe the shadows from the leaves. Okay, so the tree has a lot of wet areas right now. So I think I'm gonna let it dry, and let's work down here a bit. So I have the round brush in my hand. I'm gonna try working with this first. We might switch to one of those other brushes with some more texture, but I think I'm gonna start here, and let's get a medium green, maybe medium dark green. Add a little bit of brown. I want to work on bringing some of the shadows up higher. Some of the plants up higher, I should say. Shadows and highlights. And I think this brush feels a little big. Might switch soon to the small round brush. The nice thing about working with the large brush is I feel like you can get very organic shapes. I try to take James Gurney's advice that I heard in one of his videos, where he tries to use the biggest brush possible for as long as possible before switching to smaller brush. So I try to do that and get creative with using the brush and seeing what kind of shapes we get from it. I'm also holding my brush pretty loosely to get some more sketchy kind of effects. I like that for painting natural things, not holding the brush too tight. Sometimes I have less control and I misplace a brushstroke more easily, but overall I like the effect from the loose painting, so it's kind of worth it in the pros and cons in the end. All right, so let's move to a lighter green. So we're moving our way towards the highlights, and I'm adding a bit of brown for like a little bit more of a natural color. I mean, the bright greens are beautiful and also very natural. And I mean, if you look at my photo, the green is really, really bright. But I find that, especially in the sunny areas, I like to move my greens a little bit warmer. And finally, I'm going all the way to this leaf green. And I'm gonna scribble in a little bit in the highlights. So we've got a lot of wet paint here, and I'm okay with it. I like it when these greens mix together and get like some messy effects, because I'm painting such a large area of plants and foliage and natural things, and I kind of like the mess a little bit, especially when it's like it's not in the focal point and it's like it's okay for it to just be a little chaotic. This is my personal taste, and this is like a style that I'm exploring these days. So it's up to you, like those who are painting along and watching, you know, if you don't like what's happening here, don't worry, just let it dry in between the colors. Like paint the medium green and then let your paint dry completely and then paint the next color. So what I'm doing is purposely painting into the other colors while things are wet, but you can choose to just let things dry in between and it'll be nice and clean. I'm also going to use little dots up here because we kind of want to hint at leaves, foliage, all kinds of stuff, grasses popping up over the shadows, more into our view, and we don't necessarily have to paint all the individual leaf shapes or make complete sense of everything we're painting, especially in the distance. We just need to paint some blobs, paint some blobs that feel like something. And then here we can get a little bit more precise with like making things look like leaf shapes. A little bit closer to us so we can start getting more clean like that. So here now I'm taking this dark area and painting some leaves coming up from that. So it's kind of the same idea we did earlier with the grasses. We had some grasses extend up here, and now we're kind of just taking it a little further and adding some leaves and things. And I'm trying to also have some grasses like curve and bend and not have them all just go, you know, straight up and down. And if you look at the photo, you'll see a lot of that. So remembering not to make things too perfect. Let them be organic and a little bit messy. It's okay. Not too much to say here other than what I already talked about. I'm just kind of doing more of the same. It's just back and forth with these different organic shapes and lights and shadows, and kind of just narrowing in on what I think are the right values. I'm holding off on one last layer of highlight though. So right now I've got a lot of wet paint everywhere. I'm going to keep going, and we will let this dry, and then there'll be one more layer of like the lightest highlights that are going to come over here. But I definitely want to wait and let everything dry in between before we do that. Then we'll be able to get a nice clean layer. I try to spritz my paint throughout this to keep them wet. I want to use a little bit of dark brown. I have to be careful because this side of the tree has been a little bit of a problem for me back and forth. So I want to put a little shadow, because doesn't it look a little flat there right now? I want to put a little shadow down here. Using a smaller brush, I'm going to try to be a little bit more careful here. And then up here, maybe I'll do another bit of shadow. And it's all on the dappled lighting, really. I want to work that color up into here so that it kind of matches the rest and ties in. There's something here. This area is a bit too much contrast. So there's a couple things we can do about it. I can come in here and kind of scrub this a little bit and just make it soft. I can also, I think I might want to add like a little bit more bounce light there. Like I'm looking at the photo and I really like this one area of the tree in the photo. It's like there's shadow here, there's a little bit of bounce light, and then it gets darker right here. And I would like to achieve that if I can. So I think I'm gonna wait for that to dry and then we'll take a look. And soon we're gonna be adding flowers, which I'm very excited about. We have been very patient, but they're really light. They're gonna go on top of everything. So for me, it felt like it made sense to do them at the end when everything that's sort of behind them and under them was already in place. So I'm bouncing around. This tree bark needs to dry. So in the meantime, while that's drying, I'm gonna work on some of these leaves. So I'm just gonna add some dimension. So right now we've only used one color for these leaves in the background. So I think it's nice to add both shadows and highlights. I should be careful not to go too far with the shadows because I feel like already the painting is probably a bit dark. Like looking at the photo, you know, there's lights and darks everywhere throughout the scene, but I think overall there's a lot of dark values going on in my painting. I don't want it to get too dark. This is supposed to feel like a nice, airy, sunny, happy day. I do really like having multiple values up in the trees, leaves. There's some areas where there's like a branch behind another branch, and then light has to shine through both of those. So it really blocks the light and you get a shadow there. And then there's some areas where there's only like one layer of leaves and the light can shine right through and you get that subsurface scattering with the leaf just glows with the light and it's really beautiful. And I feel like it's just one of those things where you've got to have that variety to really give that beautiful glittery effect. If all the leaves are the same color or value and you don't have that variety, then it just feels a little bit less convincing. It's not as lively and magical. So we're gonna put all that in if we can. So now I'm going to move on to a more medium green and let's add some of that color. So especially on the outside of some of these groupings of the darker leaves where the leaves might be thinner and you get more light shining through. And also I have to be careful because I noticed that I'm closing up a lot of these openings. I have to be careful with that because I do want to still have like areas of sky and I want different shapes and sizes. So I don't want to just evenly space and fill in everything with leaves. We can go back with the blue and paint in some spaces and I think it looks nice to do that anyway. We might do that anyway, just add a couple spaces back in here and there. This area I want to be extra careful in because I feel like it's another focal area. This is a focal area and to me this is also a focal area. So I want to be careful. And maybe actually, I want to add like a little branch, something like this. So I haven't added all that many branches in compared to the photo. So this could be a time to add a little bit more as we go. It's interesting how the first part of the painting process can be so much happening so fast, lots of big changes. to the painting because you're, big brushes, big shapes. And then by the last step, things slow down quite a bit. And here we are painting little bits. Sadly, the way that I painted in things over here, we kind of lost the shape of these. I'm noticing now these branches, we can't really see them very well anymore. So I might try to paint those back in with some blue sky color. Okay, more leaves. Back here, I see some interesting stuff happening that I like, and I see like the effect of some shadows in between groups of foliage, and I want to just add like a couple more dark shadows in there. And I think we might need to dry the painting again at this point. They've got a lot of wet paint everywhere, so let me dry it. Okay, so I just dried the painting so we can go on with another layer. And this is gonna be a fun layer. I'm going to grab some white. We're gonna mix a light color, something like this. We are gonna have some branches coming in front of pretty much everything we've done so far. Here and here, there's some branches coming out. So I wanna look at the reference and take from that, but think about for each branch, like, is there somewhere we can change it to make it better? Is it already optimal for our composition? So here, the first one is gonna come off here. So this is the start of it, and then it's gonna come into the light here, and then it goes back into shadow by the end. So I really like it. I like how it looks. So let's just go with what's in the photo. So it comes like this. It's not quite in between these two in the middle. It's more towards this guy. So we'll start it there, and then it kind of goes over here. So I think it's just important to note the spacing, because I think it's less interesting if we put it smack in between the two. So keeping it kind of on that side. And then there's another little piece that comes off of that one and goes up. And similarly over here, this one, and then next to it here, this one has a piece that comes off and goes in front of this branch, and then goes up, and then kind of goes into the shadows again up there. So we have to remember to finish these off with a darker color. And a couple other things. So there's some branches that come off of this guy. Kind of goes like this. So this one is going over an area that has a lot of light to it already. So we're going to have to add shadow to the underside of this branch so that it pops out. So it's going to get shadow and highlight on this one so we can see it better. And then up here, let's bring this into the light and maybe have one kind of angling back in towards the tree. And what about over here? Well, here, remember I had to paint this shadow back in? I want to try again with the highlight. Hopefully it's gonna go well. So basically, somewhere up here, this line that's already there, I kind of just want to swoop down a little bit lower and then just also a little like brighter maybe. So let's mix some more white in there. And I might need to move this actually to kind of position my hand so I can lay it down like this on the paper. I think it'll be a little bit more firm. Okay, so that was a nice clean brush stroke, at least. Okay, we're gonna let that dry, and then I might need to bring some little shadows over the bottom because as you can see, it's really stark and it might be a bit too much, like it really stands out. Okay, so let's finish off these branches up here. Bring a darker brown, kind of meet up with this one. We can have a shadow side. And that kind of just disappears into the foliage. Okay, and then this one here. This one also is gonna have to sort of disappear into the foliage, just kind of ends awkwardly. So what I'm gonna do is when this is dry, we'll paint more green coming in front of that, and hopefully that's gonna be just fine. We'll add some darker branches here too. There's a lot going on up in that area of the photo, and in my painting it's a little bit plain right now. I'm gonna do something like this. There's a lot of branches and shadows of branches, and I like that. I like that look. We need some more detail, but it doesn't mean we have to overthink it. It's a very natural scene, lots of organic stuff, so I'm gonna try to stay loose. Try to stay loose. That is something I'm always trying to work on. I want to work on the background a little bit. I want a nice bright green. We could take this leaf green, maybe a little bit of yellow. Is that better? I don't really want a, I don't want a brown green back here. I want a nice bright green. Yeah, that's better. So back here, I don't want things to get very, very detailed. I want to keep it secondary to the amount of detail we're going to have in the foreground, but I do feel like there's a little something missing there. Oops, that was a big blob of water. No. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna add some leaf green, some fresh leaf green. Things are getting messy over here. By the end of my painting process, I've got brushes everywhere. Okay, so I want to paint some lighter green leaves coming in front of everything here. I'm looking and I think it's dry. I'm gonna start with the round brush, see if that's the right brush. I think so, because I'm gonna be working, this is a nice firm brush and I'm gonna have pretty thick paint. So I think I wanna use this brush. And here we go. I'm gonna start over here. And what I'm trying to do is paint some leaves that are closer to us, closer to the viewer, and they're coming out into the light. And just having some light shine right on them. And I have to use really thick paint right now, or else it's just not going to cover. It's not gonna be opaque. I could probably use a smaller brush, but like I said, sometimes it helps with making more interesting and organic shapes. And right now with these leaf groupings, I think it might be nice, might work well doing it this way. And I'm following the reference for the idea as far as where to place these leaves, but I'm gonna change some things because in the photo there's not so many of these lighter leaves, and I think that the painting could use more of them than what's actually in the reference. And then let's have some up here too. It's a little scary sometimes to change things up because we know what's in the photo at least works as well as what we can see there. And then I have the idea, okay, maybe it could work a little better if we change things here or there, but I could be wrong. So, you know, but that's how we learn. We have to try things. We're gonna try and see what we think. So something to think about in the photo, only this area has the light leaves from the tree. Is that okay? I mean, I do think it looks nice, but balance-wise, should we have like at least a couple over here somewhere? Where would they go? Something right now that I'm looking at is these leaves. I feel like I need to also paint some darker ones nearby because some of them are gonna be like just in the shadow or like right under these other leaves. Something feels a little flat here. So I think we need for dimension to add some darker green leaves. I'm just trying to find the right amount of saturation for them. All right, back into a more medium green. It's just a lot of back and forth here until we like it. One question that I get a lot is, how do you know when a painting is finished? And that's a really difficult question. I think it gets a little bit easier with experience to know when a painting should be finished, but I think it's always difficult. I've talked to even very experienced artists that still have that feeling of questioning when a painting is done. I think one thing that I notice is, you know, as I'm working right now, I can tell it's not done because I'm still feeling a lot of like, oh, I need to fix this. Oh, I need to fix this. And I'm kind of bouncing around the painting, fixing stuff. But that feeling eventually slows down. Eventually I look at the painting and I'm kind of like, you know, and it's like, there isn't any particular area of the painting that's screaming to me, hey, something's wrong here. And then I start to realize, okay, I'm happy with it. Okay, it's good. Okay, we're getting there, you know, that kind of thing. So it's more of like, I stop noticing things I can fix, and then I feel like it's done at that point. I'm gonna paint some blues back in. also going to use this to get rid of some little white spaces that probably don't need to be there anymore. I wasn't too obsessed with getting rid of these random white spaces throughout the painting process because sometimes, you know, the sky will be pretty light or pretty white up in when it's shining through the trees, or you'll have light reflecting off of leaves. So sometimes these little white spaces, when you have a lot of foliage, can actually be nice, act like little reflections off of leaves and things. So I wasn't crazy about going in and taking them all away. But now that we're nearing the end, I am seeing that some of them are catching my eye a little too much, and sort of I want to tone them down because I don't want my eye to be sticking on those places. Of course, when we add the flowers here, that's going to help a lot. And actually, let's start with some flowers. Why not? It's time. I can't believe we waited this long. Okay, so in the background, we have some white flowers that are very far away. And I'm going to use a blue, pretty dark blue for them, because compared to how dark it is already back there, this is already gonna have some pop to it, and it's gonna look like white in the shadows. So we're starting with this. There's also going to be some yellow flowers, some buttercups. We'll start with these. Trying to keep the dots relatively small because they're pretty far away. There are also in the background some branches and things that we can see in the reference, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to add any of those because sometimes, you know, from this distance I'm thinking, is that really important, or is it just, you know, if we paint the big mass of foliage, is that enough? But I think a couple little branches, a couple little bits of warm color back here, I think could be a good thing. Kind of just going with the flow over here, but I felt like I liked the idea of the feeling that the foliage was kind of pouring down, almost like a river here, into some of the backgrounds that are like pouring into the midground, I guess. Okay, I have a lot of wet paint here. I should probably wait for it to dry and then see if I want to do anything else, because I'm going to start getting too messy over there. So one thing I want to fix is just this area. Like I said before, I feel like this was a little too clean and bright and crisp right here. So what we can do is hopefully cut into that a bit, just with a darker color, and make it look a bit more gritty and like that bark texture that we've been trying to get. And maybe a little bit more green to kind of transition over here. This area is a bit blotchy and not quite working for me. Ah, we're so close. This is a part of the process that can be really tough for me sometimes, and we have to persevere because we're quite close. We came really far, but some areas are just not quite working, and I think I can make them a lot better, but we gotta stay strong. We can't give up now because these areas can be really improved, I think. So this branch has a little detail that catches the sun over here. And I think it's kind of nice. I'm gonna add some random little lines and dots over here just to indicate like some random branches catching the light. There aren't quite so many in the photo, but I think it's a really beautiful effect. So I'd like to just, we'll add some more for dramatic effect in our painting. Right, so here's the little detail. And there's actually a couple little areas like this. I can kind of hint at another one here. I want to start working on the flowers that are close up here. I'm going to use a nice thin long brush, and I'm going to grab a nice bright green, thick paint, not a lot of water in the mixture because I want it to be bright and opaque. And here we go. So I'm painting the stem of the flower first, and I might leave some spaces in between, do something like this, and not actually connect it absolutely everywhere, because we're going to be adding flowers and leaves overlapping, and maybe some areas gone into the shadow, and that's why it wouldn't be so illuminated and bright. And I'm going to bring a whole bunch of these grasses in here. And a brush like this makes it a lot easier to do these elongated strokes. You can definitely do it with a round brush, but a brush like this just helps with a little bit more stability while doing a thin stroke. So I want to mostly focus on the area around here. I can have like a couple little guys coming over to the edge, but I mostly want to keep my very detailed area close to the focal point, close to the tree here. So here we're kind of doing the reverse of what we did earlier in the shadows, where we brought the shadow color up in front of the highlight. Now we're bringing the highlight in front of the shadows. But both versions kind of use that silhouetting effect for adding detail and impact. So I'm going to add a couple little details back here, even though it's far away. I'm going to try to keep them small. But I do want that texture to also be present back there. And I think those are adding a lot. Oh, you guys are going to paint the flowers. I'm so excited. Finally. Let's have some fresh white on the palette. And I'm going to use a small round brush, maybe even smaller than what I've been working with up to this point. So this is a real small one, size 0. We'll see. Maybe it's too small. we're gonna try. We'll see. And I'm gonna grab a little mixture of blue and white, and I'm gonna start, actually let's add a little bit of green to that too. So this is for the shadows with a little bit of that green light, because there's so much green, so there's a lot of green bounce light. So in here, in the shadows, we're gonna start, and I'm just gonna try bunching up some of these shapes. So most of the flowers are going to be in the light, but some are in shadow. I'm starting with those because they're generally going to be like furthest or lowest. And the way that these plants grow, it's like it works to kind of illustrate them as like a grouping of dots. So you want to kind of group them up and then do a bunch of dots together. Even all the way up here, there's some that are in shadow, so I'm just gonna begin with those. And maybe let's do some of the highlights, and then we can always go back and forth if we need more shadows. So I'm gonna grab some, I think I'll go with pure white. I always like to kind of reserve the super, super bright white. So I might do like just a very light blue, and then finally the lightest. So here we go. This is like the next layer. It looks so bright, like even though it's not pure white, it's compared to everything around it might as well be. And the paint is quite goopy on my brush, but that's okay. It works. It works for these little circles. And I'm kind of imagining them coming in the direction of how I painted the stems, imagining them coming up in that direction and going towards the light. And they come up really tall, so actually I need to go higher, looking at the photo. They spread out pretty far. It's yet again a situation where I tried to put some space between them and not fill them in completely, because the spaces are important. They look nice and glittery, and I don't know, there's that almost sparkly feeling when they're sprinkled around. And then let's go over here with this color that I have, and then I want to go back and do some more over here, but with the actually go in with the pure white. So we'll do a little bit more. I like to kind of move around. When I have one color that I know I'm going to need in multiple places, I kind of like to go around and use it in those other places first, and then just go back and get the new color instead of like washing your brush, going back and forth. It doesn't always work out, but sometimes you can do it that way and kind of save some paint, and it's a little more convenient. But look at how already having the two different colors, the two different values, makes a big difference in depth. It really makes a more convincing lighting situation by having the darker, like bluish white in the shadows. These flowers are everywhere right now. It makes me so happy. It's such a beautiful time of year. I like this part of the spring when it's a little bit later, because everything is almost fully green. It's not quite there. There's a lot of the trees, the big trees haven't completely filled in with leaves yet, but it's getting there. And there's still a lot of flowers. There's a lot of things in bloom, but there's also a lot of green because the green is my favorite. So closer we get to summer, the better in my opinion. I always love the full green and the lushness. And that is what inspires a lot of my paintings, as you may have noticed. May have noticed the theme. I can't help it. It's just what inspires me the most, and I just decided to embrace it and lean into it. And I'm very thankful to all of you who enjoy that and enjoy exploring that with me. I also love other seasons. Autumn is another very special one, but my favorite is summer. I am going to use now the pure white, although there's still a tiny bit of blue mixed in because of it was touching, but this is going to be the closest to pure white in the painting. And let's do it. So a final bit of detail to the flowers. So I'm going to focus this color always at the top of the flower towards the sunlight. If you ever want to get like a really, really extreme pop on these flowers, the best thing to do is just take the white and put like a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of yellow, because that color temperature difference will really, really make them pop. So instead of having a hint of blue in there, if we want to make it feel like the sunlight is hitting, just a hint of yellow, and it doesn't take much. I need to put a tiny bit more water because my paint is a bit goopy, kind of hard to work with. Okay, so can you guys see the difference with a tiny bit of yellow? It's a warm color to it. I think it's better for really showing off the highlights. But again, you don't want to do that everywhere. We want this in select places. Marty, I might have to cover that. I just feel like this down here, I should keep that dark because it's making it look really 3D, and then that kind of took away some of that depth. So that's why I'm gonna paint that darker again. Just how it's reading to me. I've been working on this painting for a little while now. I'm not sure exactly how long it's been. It becomes a little bit harder to see and judge for yourself, you know, how things are going in the painting. And it's good to take a break. For the sake of this video, I'm gonna keep going, but sometimes if I reach a point where I'm like, I'm not sure, I can't decide if I like this or not, and I need some time, and then I'll just stop, and if I can, work on it the next day or something like that. So I would definitely encourage that if you guys are feeling that as well at some point in your painting process. You know, you can take a break and just come back to it another day, or later in the day or something. Just give yourself a little break so you can come back and see it more fresh and clear again. It really helps sometimes. Putting white flowers over here in the sunlight. Some back here in the sunlight too. Okay, and I want to fix that. Let's see what it looks like. Just gonna cover that up with the darker one. Yeah, I do like it better, I think. I'm just gonna keep these dark. Okay, and we need more leaves. So these plants all have, you know, foliage too. So let's bring some of that in here. And just drag forward and towards us to get some of these foreshortened leaves. Oops, that one was pretty big. Okay, up here in the sun. I'm starting with a light color, but I am going to go in with like a medium green too. So now a little bit darker green. See if this is a good color. So I am going to add shadow. So I'm going to make some leaf shapes that are just painted with this color. And I'm also, for some of the leaves, going to go and paint half of the leaf with this color. So it kind of looks like they're in the shadow and then they're coming out in the highlight. And we can go even darker. And maybe a little bit of blue for in the cool parts of the shadow. And add some yellow and do some last little bright leaves. There's a couple that are really bright. So you don't actually see all the stems here. I'm not sure if I need to add one. Put a couple very dark ones. So let's see what we can do. We are so close to finishing this. I actually am overall really happy with it. I'm really unsure if I should add the yellow flowers. The painting is starting to feel very complete to me and I'm just not sure about it. We'll see, we'll see. Okay, here. There's a detail in the tree I'm trying to illustrate here. So painting inside. Like a little shadow around the rim. Over here and here, we just need some dappled lighting. And this has already been layered quite a lot. There's just a few times I didn't like what I did, so it's been layered and layered, but we can still make it work. Curious about adding some like purple blue shadows in here. Ooh, okay. I like the color. It was a bit lighter than I was expecting. I'm gonna add some green. Still not dark enough. We're kind of on the path though. So I like this color for bounce light. I think it makes the tree look three-dimensional, but I also think it's just too light. So I think we're close. We need to go darker still. It's too saturated. That might work. As much as I love dappled lighting, it can sometimes be hard to paint because of so many different value changes. because you've got the same object going into the shadow, into the light, back into the shadow. So it is quite a lot going on. I do think it's so beautiful. It's worth it. It's worth it. We have to be patient. We have to go back and forth, but it's worth it. These smaller branches too, like I think having them be so clean goes against our dappled light feeling. All right, do I have the right color here? Let's try that. So I want to bring this shadow. It's very green. And basically we want leaf shapes here, streaking across. And because the paint is so thick here, and I'm painting with quite a bit of water, it is very easy to lift up the paint from below. So I have to be careful. The texture is not super clean, but I don't mind because, like I said, when we're painting like a tree bark, it can be gritty. So we'll see when this dries. And I'm gonna put a couple shadows down here too, because down here I think these flowers are starting to maybe put some shadows. Moving a light color for here. So the light's shining from this side, and looking at the photo, I still feel like this tree should have the brightest part hitting it. Better, I think. And now I'm just going to do a little dry brushing with the texture. I'm just holding the brush flat against the paper and just dragging it lightly to get some texture for the bark. Okay, so now my question is, do we add the yellow flowers in the background? I am never one to remove flowers. I'm always one to add flowers. I find it so strange that I'm asking myself this question. I guess my issue with the flowers is I feel like there's already a lot going on down here. And so balance-wise, I feel like some highlights up here, some little bit more noise going on up here. But I'm like satisfied. I think I just answered it for myself. I think I'm not gonna put the yellow flowers. But those of you who are painting the reference photo, you can see them. There's buttercups, and they're very pretty. But I just, for me, I'm not gonna add them, but you can add them if you want. Decide what you think for your painting. Let me know what you guys think about that, and if you are gonna paint them. Do I have enough leaves up here? If I'm gonna add anything, it's maybe some medium value leaves. Kind of here. We have a really light green in the highlights, and then it only makes sense that there might be a couple nearby to that are like partially lit instead of just like really bright and then that's it. So a couple here and there of medium green. Okay, I think my final detail is going to be some last little white flowers. I'm grabbing the pure white here. And just a couple more small details. We were talking earlier about how to know when a painting is done. I do think this one is giving me a little bit more of a hard time because I keep thinking, oh, I want to add one last thing. Oh, I want to add one last thing. Definitely getting that urge with these flowers because you could pretty much go, I mean, if you look at the photo, there's so many. I think sometimes it's better to simplify it or just do a little bit less in some places. And then of course you want the focal point to be nice and lush and detailed, but I don't think that the whole painting needs to be quite as full. So trying to find the happy place with that. I think that's looking better. I'm gonna grab my smallest round brush for the last details here. And what I want is just to have some little leaves peeking up in between one of these layers of flowers. So right here, I hope I've got the right color here. I think so. Yeah. Maybe one darker one. And while I have that color, this area feels a bit messy. So I think, you know, it's kind of in the shadows. It's not drawing too much attention, which is good. But still, when I look at it, it's like, we need to clean that up. Thank you so much for all your kind feedback on the last video. It really encouraged me to go again with one of these long ones. And if you enjoy it, let me know. I'm going to try to keep doing these. They are a bit more difficult, but I do enjoy them. So it's like, I'm definitely willing to make these kinds of videos. I like going through the whole process. You know, I don't have to worry about trying to say everything in 20 seconds or less. So I do enjoy the longer format videos, and hopefully this one isn't too long. We'll see. If so, I will work on just making smaller paintings, I guess. Working in my smaller sketchbook and just painting a little bit smaller, because at this size, I can only go so fast. So that just kind of is what it is. But we can definitely do like a smaller, simpler paintings too. But I'm definitely learning a lot as I go, getting a little bit better with editing and things like that. So hopefully I'll be able to share videos a little bit faster here. All right, I think I'm getting to that point where I really better stop or I'm going to actually just overwork the painting. I think we reached a good spot. I hope so. Hopefully when I look at this later with fresh eyes, I will still agree that it was time to stop. Here it is with the tape peeled off. It's always satisfying to see those clean edges. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you guys like this one. I hope you like how it turned out. It challenged me in some parts, but I feel like we were able to get to a good spot in the end. If you painted along, I would love to see what you did. Feel free to tag me on social media or share it in my Discord if you like. I'll put links to everything down below. Also, I'm starting to create blog posts to go along with these videos. If it helps you to visualize things in that way, I'm also putting some notes and sort of step-by-step information there, as well as the reference photo that you can download and a view of the finished painting and everything. So those will accompany these videos and hopefully be helpful. But let me know if there's anything else that would be useful to you that you can think of. Suggestions are welcome. And yeah, thank you once again for joining me. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and I will see you in the next one. Bye.